Welcome to this informational webinar for RFA-RM-24-013. This is the Complementary New Approach Methodologies, NAMS Data Hub and Coordinating Center, NOFO. So there'll be several of us from NIH today presenting on this, the information on this NOFO. My name is Dan Shaughnessy. I'm a program director at NIEHS, that's the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and I'm the scientific contact for this RFA. I'll be joined by my colleague, Christy Cano, who's at the NIH Office of Strategic Coordination, who will cover some of the details of the RFA. I'll start with an overview of the complementary program and the overarching goals of this Data Hub and Coordinating Center, and then Christy will give a little bit more information about some of the details in the RFA. And then we will cover some of the review considerations for this RFA at the end. So I'll begin by a general overview of the complementary program, beginning with what are NAMs, or New Approach Methodologies. So these are generally in vitro, in chemico, or in silico methods that can be used individually or in combination to improve on current models for adverse health outcomes and modeling human disease. NAMs used alone or to complement current animal models can answer difficult questions in biomedical research, where the current in vivo models alone are lacking or have consistently underperformed. So the FDA Modernization Act 2.0 actually allows or enables drug registration without the absolute requirement of the use of animals in safety toxicology assessment when there are alternative risk assessment models available. And one example, there are several examples. One is there are NAMS approaches that are now accepted to predict skin sensitization hazard and potency in place of animal models. So the complementary program will address current challenges in NAMS validation, adoption, and widespread use, including the development and validation of NAMS that better model systemic and developmental effects of environmental exposures and applications for drug safety testing. And this includes the development of NAMs in which the current experimental models are lacking in the ability to model pathology or physiology of disease. And a couple of examples are in the area of neuroscience and behavioral research. So the current slide lists the key components of the complementary program. The complementary NAMS technology development centers will stimulate the development of NAMs to address areas of greatest need, with an emphasis on increasing biological complexity, the development of innovative combinatorial NAMs, as well as data sharing and training activities. The NAMS Data Hub and Coordinating Center will create a searchable repository for NAMS data developed through the complementary components, will create integrated data structures, and improve the fairness of NAMS relevant data. The Validation and Qualification Network, or VQN, will help to establish standardized reporting for NAMS data and applies general validation and qualification frameworks, working through a consortium of federal agencies that include regulatory agencies, industry partners, and international partners. And then each of these components will have activities for training and outreach to help with the dissemination and adoption of NAMs across regulatory science and the wider biomedical science efforts. So here's a graphic of illustrating how the different components of complementary will work together. Again, the NAMS tech development centers will develop these integrated or combinatorial NAMs. They'll undertake a number of pilot projects for each of the individual NAMs. They include a number of cores that will help to organize each of the centers, and they have a strong emphasis on community engagement and training. So the Tech Development Centers will interact with the NAMS Data Hub and Coordinating Center and house the data, both the raw and processed data that's generated through these Tech Development Centers. And then in addition, they'll interact with the Validation and Qualification Network. And basically working on things like data standards, some of the standardized reporting that will be developed in collaboration between the Data Hub and the VQN. So this is just a graphic kind of illustrating the flow from stakeholder engagement to NAMS implementation and adoption, working through technology development, centralized resources, and validation and qualification. So this RFA will use a cooperative agreement mechanism, a U-24, and this is a support mechanism that NIH uses frequently for high priority research areas that require a level of involvement from NIH staff that's typically higher than you would have with an R grant, for example, an R01. And the substantial involvement from NIH is usually needed for complex programs where there's additional oversight, coordination, or facilitation required. So fundamentally, NIH staff will work jointly with the research project's PD or our principal investigator, acting as a partner to support and stimulate the research. Staff are not meant to play a dominant role nor assume any direction or primary responsibility for awardee activities. So specifically for the Data Hub and Coordinating Center, the NDHCC will provide a centralized data hub and searchable repository for the various NAMS data, will help to establish data standards for data reporting and model credibility, for example, for in silico NAMS, and then help to implement integrated testing strategies, for example, for NAMS that combine in vivo, in chemical, and in silico approaches. The NDHCC will develop strategies for data interoperability and data reuse and develop tools for data analytics and sharing of this NAMS data. So next, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Christy Cano, to go into some of the details of this RFA.
Thank you, Dan. So the purpose of the NAMS Data Hub and Coordinating Center is to provide overarching support for the complementary consortium. It will serve as the centralized data hub and data coordinating center. It will also serve as the coordinating center for the overall complementary program. The NDHCC will coordinate and manage the curation and dissemination of all NAMS relevant data, metadata, analyses, tools, computational models, and validation and qualification documentation generated by the complementary program, and do so in a manner that ensures maximum interoperability with data from other NAMS-related repositories and consortia. The NDHCC will have 4 main functions, which are listed here, that we'll now go through one by one. First, the NDHCC will create a centralized hub for the NAMS data generated by the Technology Development Centers, or TDCs. The purpose of the Data Hub is to support collaboration within the complementary consortium. It's intended to provide a secure, centralized data platform to support data sharing within the consortium. It is not intended as a permanent repository for the long-term archive of all data and resources generated and used by the complementary program. Rather, the Data Hub will create a unified search interface for the consortium and the scientific community to use to locate and access complementary data sets and resources during the program period, regardless of where the data sets and resources are stored long-term. Second, data coordination, standardization, harmonization, and integration. The NDHCC will be responsible for developing and implementing a coordinated NAMS data management and sharing approach for data harmonization across the complementary program. Working closely with the VQN, the NDHCC will develop a framework for standards, metadata, and common data elements that apply to the data gathered by complementary awardees to maximize their potential for validation and qualification. Interoperability with other existing NIH data ecosystems and NAMS resources is a priority, and the NDHCC should align with the policies and interoperability standards that are currently in use. The NDHCC will also be responsible for developing a framework to enable meaningful comparison and integration across heterogeneous NAMS datasets generated by Complementary, including individual and population comparative studies. Finally, as part of its sustainability responsibilities, NDHCC will be responsible for participating in the Common Fund Data Ecosystem, or CFDE, with the goal of integrating complementary datasets and resources into CFDE. Third, the NDHCC will also be responsible for developing tools and processes for supporting data analytics, interpretation, and visualization of NAMS model and data, as well as tools and workflows for promoting NAMS reuse and tracking how data and resources generated by the complementary program are being used by the research community. We are asking the NDHCC to set aside 15% of the direct costs budget in years 3 through 5 for pilot projects to support the development of additional data analysis tools to help analyze, visualize, and interpret NAMS data. Pilot projects can be designed in collaboration with the Technology Development Center investigators. The pilot projects do not need to be included as a separate budget item, but applicants should include details of potential pilot project activities to meet the evolving needs of the consortium in their application. Finally, the NDHCC will act as the coordinating center, helping to organize and coordinate activities across the consortium. This will include developing an organizational and administrative structure to promote communication and coordination across the program. As the coordinating center, the NDHCC will also be responsible for organizing and hosting consortium meetings, including 2 hybrid in-person and virtual programs meetings per year. The NDHCC will also help to track and coordinate activities across the program and help facilitate logistics for training and outreach events in coordination with the other complementary consortium members. Now I'll hand it back to Dan.
Thanks, Christy. So some logistics for the RFA. So letters of intent were due on February 10th. If you haven't submitted one, you can still submit a letter of intent in the next week or so. The applications will be due on March 10th. And then the scientific merit review will take place in July of this year, and then go to the NIEHS Advisory Council for second level of review in October. The earliest start date for the award will be in December 2025. So in addition to the other parts of the application, you'll need to have an attachment for a milestone plan. We're asking for quantitative milestones that can be used to evaluate the progress of the awarded grant, and milestones will also be part of the original review of the application. So again, this is a cooperative agreement, meaning substantial programmatic involvement beyond the normal oversight of awards for a typical R01 or other R grant. You should review the award information in Section 6, particularly the cooperative agreement terms and conditions. So in accepting this award, the recipient agrees to any of the activities under the award that are subject to the provisions in this cooperative agreement terms and conditions. So here's a partial list of some of those in Section 6. The PI and the NIH staff will negotiate and agree on a final set of approved milestones, and those can be renegotiated during the project period if needed. As the NDHCC, this also means accepting and participating in the cooperative nature of the consortium. Of course, as the data center, the NDHCC will be expected to share the data and resources developed within the center for the complementary consortium and as appropriate with the broader community. So here's the contact information, my information, if you have additional scientific questions. If you have questions on the financial and grants management aspects of the application, you can contact Jenny Greer. She's our Chief Grants Management Officer at NIEHS. And then for peer review questions, we have this contact the web link here as well. So a little bit of information about the application review. So as I mentioned, the reviews will take place in July of 2025. Applications that are deemed unresponsive will be administratively withdrawn. These will be reviewed by a special emphasis panel that will be organized by the NIH Center for Scientific Review, meaning that this SEP or special emphasis panel will only include temporary members. The panel will only review applications submitted to this RFA for the Data Hub and Coordinating Center. The roster for the study section will be posted 30 days prior to the review meeting. Summary statements will be available 30 days after the review meeting and provide a summary of the key points, comments, and scores of the assigned reviewers. All of the applications will receive a written critique. Only those applications deemed to have the highest scientific and technical merit will be discussed and assigned an overall impact score. So as with other reviews, the overall impact score goes from a scale from 1 to 9, 1 being outstanding, and really reflect the likelihood that the project will exert a sustained, powerful influence on the field involved. In addition, the usual 5 scored criteria include significance, investigator, innovation, approach, and environment. And additional review criteria, where appropriate, may include protection of human subjects, vertebrate animals, or biohazards. So specific considerations for this RFA, I call your attention to Section 5, the application review information. Read this carefully and pay particular attention to the bullets under specific to this NOFO for each of those criteria that I mentioned. So this is the, we'll adjourn this information webinar for RFA 24-013. And we'd be happy to take any questions through the complimentary inbox, or you can contact me directly with my contact information. Thank you very much.